Okay. Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining. Just give me a quick nod to let me know if the sound is okay, that you hear everything, and we'll get going. All right, sounds good. First off, I know that there is a movement in the chat to get me to wear a hoodie. If I couldn't swing getting dressed at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time, I think I have a pretty big issue here. So yes, I'm dressed in the usual uniform here because I have no excuse. It's not 4 o'clock in the morning now. I can manage to put on my shirt and tie. So with that said, let's jump in. There's a couple of things that there's a couple of things that I want to address first. Just some new news that's broken today. I also want to go over a little bit of what we saw in these past hearings, because I think it'll be good to do like a little bit of a wrap up. So right off the bat, I want to talk about some news that just broke, that Department of Justice, a guy named Jeffrey Clark, who Trump wanted to make the acting attorney general because he was on board with Trump's scheme to steal the last election. His home was raided by the Department of Justice yesterday. So that's some major news in terms of what the DOJ is doing concurrently with this January 6th investigation. So, I mean, to have this guy, Jeffrey Clark, who Trump tried to install because he was willing to do Trump's bidding. He was willing to come out and say that there were irregularities in Georgia, despite there quite literally being no irregularities, no evidence of irregularities or proof of irregularities in Georgia. That's who Jeffrey Clark was. He's the guy in the last hearing, and I'm sure in this hearing too, because this one will focus on the DOJ. But he's the guy in the last hearing who all of those Department of Justice officials said if he took over, if Jeffrey Clark took over, they would resign en masse. So just to kind of highlight like the depravity, the danger of this one guy. So the DOJ raided his home yesterday. There's no word yet on what they were looking for, what came out of that, and there likely won't be, because with these DOJ investigations, that's how it usually goes. Which, by the way, kind of highlights the importance of this January 6th investigation, because all of this stuff would be happening quietly in private if it was just the DOJ. But the fact that we have this January 6th investigation happening in broad daylight, with these streams, like with these witnesses that we're hearing from, all of this would have been non-existent, and how so much of this is hopefully having an impact on public sentiment, and the fact that we have roughly 20% of Republicans who think that Trump was responsible for the events of January 6th. That is a big number in that party. The fact that we have 20% of Republicans who blame Trump for the events of January 6th, who think that he was solely responsible for what happened on January 6th, that it would be so much harder to make that case if the January 6th committee wasn't quite literally making that case. And it also helps that this is a bipartisan committee, that you have people like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney on the committee, and that you have a number of these people testifying. I believe almost all of the people testifying, except possibly, I would imagine, Shea and Lady Ruby, who we just heard from in this last hearing. I'm not sure that they ever spoke about their political affiliation, but everybody else was outwardly, like openly Republican, and that makes it all the more powerful that you have these Republicans on the committee, these Republicans testifying for this committee, all kind of like betraying how corrupt this scheme was. So that's the benefit of something like this committee happening. So that's the Jeffrey Clark thing. That's the news we just got on that. Obviously, another major piece of news is what happened with the Supreme Court this morning. So just to kind of quickly summarize, the Supreme Court struck down a New York law that they claim violates the right to carry, violates a right that you have to carry guns outside the home. And so states like New York, states like Maryland, California, New Jersey, Hawaii, Massachusetts all have laws that that don't guarantee someone's right to carry a weapon outside of their home. Very unsurprisingly, these states are the ones with the lowest rates of gun violence. And there's a direct correlation between the restrictiveness of these laws to just openly and easily, breezily carry weapons, and the amount of mass shootings or shootings, gun violence that does occur. So the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, so on a party line vote, said that New York wouldn't be able to uphold that law where you have a special need for a permit, for a carry permit. So New York is a may. How is it referenced? It's the difference between may and shall permit. So New York doesn't guarantee the right for that permit to be issued. It's a may issue state as opposed to a shall issue state, which is a number of these states that have that have much more lax gun laws. So this this is yet another example of the Supreme Court giving more rights to gun owners while simultaneously restricting the rights of women to have autonomy over their own body, for example. It's just kind of undoing years and years and years of precedent and steps that blue states have taken that have borne out and that have shown to be successful to protect their own citizens as mass shootings are reaching record high numbers. So they're seeing these mass shootings that happen as the direct result of more guns flooding our streets, and they're saying, you know what, we're going to strike down any of these protections that these states have put in place, because even in the face of so many mass shootings, even in the face just like weeks after 19 children were slaughtered in an elementary school, they decided that this is the time where we should strike down protections that would limit the amount of people who can easily get their hands on a weapon and have them openly or not openly, but just have them in public. It also is ironic that these are the same people who only days ago wailed on an endless loop that a gunman targeted Brett Kavanaugh, and now they are cheering on a Supreme Court ruling that makes it exponentially easier for people to get their hands on guns. So, I mean, just the double standard at play when something happens where they can clutch their pearls and have fainting spells that one of their, somebody on the right was targeted by a gun. And by the way, we're all in agreement that people shouldn't have, that it's not a good thing when people are targeted by guns. That's why the left is actually taking steps to reduce the prevalence of exactly that. This is what you get. So, in any case, this is kind of what I took out of this is we don't have to pretend that there is no recourse when the Supreme Court is completely taken over by these Republican operatives. Like, Democrats have this thing where we just kind of see bad things that are happening and we say Republicans aren't playing by the same rules as us, but God forbid we do anything about it because we don't want to seem partisan. That's why, you have people like Merrick Garland who are hesitant to overtly come out and defend the rule of law with this with the DOJ's investigation into the 2020 election. Democrats are so worried about the optics of seeming like something might be political, and yet on the other side, when you have Republicans who are overtly political, who have outwardly political operatives like on the Supreme Court, gutting 50 years of precedent, making states more dangerous when it comes to guns and doing the exact bidding of gun lobbies, and yet we have to stand here and say we can't do anything because we're here to defend the rule of law and don't want to do anything that would harm precedent or make it seem like we're being overtly political, because that's what Republicans do. At the same time, Republicans are doing it and winning at all of this. And if all we can do is kind of wave our fists and say how disappointed we are going to continue to lose. So if we continue to pretend there's no recourse here, because God forbid we expand the court, because that would be an extreme position, all the while ignoring the fact that what Republicans are doing right now on the Supreme Court, what these conservatives are doing on the Supreme Court, is in and of itself extreme. Everything that's happening in this court is an extreme position. And so we're clipping our own wings and neutering ourselves because God forbid we do anything that might be perceived as extreme, at the same exact time that Republicans are doing something that is extreme on a daily basis. And by the way, we have another decision day tomorrow. They've added an extra decision day this week. There wouldn't normally have been a Supreme Court decision day on Friday, and I expect full well that Roe being overturned would happen tomorrow. I think that it would kind of make sense in the sense that it's a Friday. It's kind of like something that they hope would be kind of dumped out with the trash, the Friday trash. This is where a lot of Republicans have tried to keep unpopular decisions in terms of when they drop them, because it's like going into a weekend. Nobody has to answer for them, purportedly, if they do that way. So I fully expect that to happen tomorrow. But if not, I mean, that's going to happen in the next week or so anyway. So just in terms of expanding the court, I think that we have to get as far away as humanly possible from this idea that court expansion is radical, because what's radical is what we're witnessing with our own eyes on a daily basis right now. What's radical is saying that New York can't have a law that prohibits constitutional carry, or whatever they're calling it, in public. When New Yorkers overwhelmingly, I think by like an 80% to 20% margin, favor these kind of restrictions. And rightfully so, because they keep people safer. And these states that do have these protections are safer. So I think the minute we can, we expand the court and we normalize this idea that court expansion is okay. It's not only okay, it actually comports with what the majority of Americans want. The asymmetry between the two sides is just incredible. Like, Republicans stack the court with political operatives. They gut these long-standing rights. They just take an axe to 50 years of precedent with Roe, which they're going to do any minute now. They overtly do the gun lobby's bidding with this law striking down New York's law. And yet, if you mention expanding the court, Republicans clutch their pearls and pull out their smelling salts and wail about the sanctity of the court. This is just nothing but political theater. That's all it is. The fact is that this court, despite what Republicans say, this court is corrupt. It is a partisan entity. People like to pretend that, like, oh, you can't mess with the Supreme Court is the last apolitical body we have. There is nothing apolitical about this court. Like, every day we have to pretend that it's not the case that the court is a political entity, a political body, and that we have to pretend that there's no recourse. But when we do that, when we're pretending that there's no recourse, because that's our decision to make, when we're pretending that there's no recourse, we're making the conscious decision to hand extremist Republicans these wins. When we are helping them by virtue of pretending that there's nothing we can do about it. We're setting a new, we're putting in place these rules. We're entrenching these rules that only we play by, that there's nothing we can do to change the makeup of the court. And yet when they want to change the makeup of the court, what do? We had Mitch McConnell that held Merrick Garland's seat open for over a year so that he can install Neil Gorsuch. We had because of a new rule that you can't have a Supreme Court justice take the bench just before an election. And yet, what was it? Amy Coney Barrett was put on the court with while votes were being cast, with 4 days left until the actual election. So when they want to twist themselves into pretzels to change the rules to get what they want, to alter the balance of the court, they do it with no hesitation whatsoever. And yet we sit here and we pretend like there's just nothing we could possibly do. And if we even mention the word court expansion, oh well, that's just the extremist elements at play right now. But there's nothing extreme about rebalancing the court against a Republican Party that has swung this court so far off the cliff to the right that forget about, I know the court isn't supposed to represent the will of the people, but I mean, the idea that they are just calling balls and strikes, and that this is what the Constitution says, that as if the Constitution has some provision that would protect people from carrying in public. I mean, what a joke. It's just political operatives, and we are fooling ourselves if we fall into this trap where we just pretend that the Supreme Court is apolitical, or that they're just calling balls and strikes. They're not. These are political operatives, just like any House member, any senator, any person running for president. They're all just political operatives. That's it. Let's stop fooling ourselves into thinking that these people are above politics, or that they're just just above the fray. This guy, Clarence Thomas's wife, was at the Stop the Steal rally. Give me a break. Give me a break. They are just as partisan as anybody else, if not more. When you have people like Alito who are just stomping all over any form of establishment. You had all of these justices, by the way, who had come out during their confirmation hearings and said how much they would respect precedent. They lied in their confirmation hearings. Are we still pretending that these people are above the fray, that they could do no wrong, that they're this the pinnacle of justice in this country? They all lied during their confirmation hearings. My God, the amount of times that we heard Susan Collins come out and assure us to the end of the earth that Justice Kavanaugh, that Brett Kavanaugh would respect precedent, only to have him turn around and he'll be part of this 6-3 decision gutting Roe when it comes out. So that's my rant on the Supreme Court. I would just say normalize expanding the Supreme Court, normalize the rhetoric surrounding expanding the Supreme Court. What's extreme, again, to boil it down into a very simple 2-second elevator pitch, what's extreme is not expanding the court. What's extreme is what's happening right now on the Supreme Court. That's what I would say. I'm going to just, I'll let my blood pressure go down like a few beats and talk about what happened in this last hearing. So a few things I want to go over for the last hearing. The last hearing talked about the violence that a lot of the election officials and in particular we had those Fulton County election workers went through as a result of Trump's efforts to overturn the last election. And I think something that was especially striking, we heard from Lady Ruby, who is wonderful, and she was like this icon in her community. Her daughter is a woman named Shay Moss, and these people worked, as elections workers in Fulton County because it was important to them that, in their lineage where people didn't have the ability to vote freely in this country, that they be a part of the system that actually allows them to have their voices be heard. What they faced was like a barrage of violence, of threats. Shay Moss came out and said when she opened her Facebook Messenger for the first time, she said, quote, she saw a lot of threats, wishing death upon me, telling me that I'll be in jail with my mother, and saying things like, be glad that it's 2020 and not 1920. Obviously a reference to there's lynching implications in that, and just a slew of disgusting racist rhetoric and analogies. Lady Ruby Freeman, she came out and said, I've lost my name and I've lost my reputation, I've lost my sense of security, all because a group of people, starting with number 45 and his ally Rudy Giuliani, decided to scapegoat me and my daughter Shay about how the presidential election was stolen. And so, these people focused in on just whatever conspiracy they could find, whatever conspiracy theory they could find, blamed these people who were not only not doing anything wrong, but standing up and doing what was right, and being elections workers and doing that hard, gritty work of making sure that our elections run smoothly. At some point, Rudy Giuliani had claimed that Shay Moss handed her mother a USB drive, and that suggested obviously that the drive contained some nefarious information. In reality, she had testified under oath that it wasn't a USB drive that she had handed her mother. It was a ginger mint, a mint. She handed her mom a mint. And for the crime of handing her mom a mint, Rudy Giuliani and Trump turned these people's lives upside down to the point where they had to leave their home. To the point where, like I said, Lady Ruby had said, I've lost my name and I've lost my reputation, I've lost my sense of security. These people can't live their lives the same way. They don't feel comfortable even saying their names in public. That was one of the most crushing parts of that last hearing, where, this woman was a vibrant member of her community and people would call her name, and now she doesn't want people saying her name because she's worried that the wrong people will hear it and target her because she was so traumatized by what happened at the hands of these people. And I spoke about this last time as well, so I apologize if you're hearing this for the second time, but like having threats like by these unnamed people is it has a really devastating impact. And like the way I've had to, even for me, and I'm used to it because the messages I get on all the different platforms are not great. And so but you kind of get a little bit desensitized to it, but still, like sometimes some of them are so sometimes some of them are so bad that it's still, anyway. For someone like these people who are just elections workers, who aren't public figures, who are just trying to do the right thing or doing the right thing because, their family hadn't been able to exercise their right to vote, and so they're doing their part by not only exercising their right to vote, but making sure that our elections more broadly run smoothly. Like, these are people who are doing something so virtuous, and for those people to be targeted, and for her to open her Facebook Messenger app for the first time and just be flooded with threats and like racist rhetoric to the point where these people had to leave their homes is just so devastating. And I know that feeling of just like having your stomach fall and just feeling unsafe in your own skin. It's not great. And like when I started doing this, by the way, I would get a ton of those messages. And my first day actually doing political commentary, I was working at Occupy Democrats way back when, and I had written an article, and my stuff was like out public on the internet because why wouldn't it be? Like, I don't take steps to remove anything, and I was just like a regular person. I published my first article on Occupy Democrats way back when, and I was flooded with a ton of, the emails were just coming in like da-ding, 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 ding, 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 like relentlessly. And I had almost quit. Just day one, almost quit and never came back because it was such a horrible feeling. And like I took that job, and so I kind of like hardened myself to it and persevered and thank God, because I love what I do. But for somebody who didn't sign up for that and isn't prepared for it and doesn't know how to, like, maybe you're not as technologically savvy and don't know how to hide your information, and even if you do, your information's already out there, and I got to it early enough that I could, and I wasn't like a public figure, and so I was able to hide all my information as best as I could. But like, I didn't have Steve Bannon immediately trying to, or Rudy Giuliani immediately trying to like expose where I lived or what my phone number was. If they had done that, how do you live in the same place? How do you keep that phone number knowing that your information is out there? So that's, that kind of stuff is scary. My heart broke for those people. In any case, I know, just by the way, a quick aside, I know some people are asking when this will begin. It starts in about 45 minutes, 12 o'clock Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. So we're 45 minutes away from this hearing beginning. Again, today's hearing is supposed to focus on the Department of Justice and Trump's efforts to try to influence members of the DOJ to go on with his attempts to overturn the election results. So we'll hear from a guy named, he was the acting Attorney General, Donahue. We'll hear about Jeffrey Clark, who, again, I said at the top of this, had his home raided by the Department of Justice yesterday. No word yet on what next steps are for that, but Jeffrey Clark did have his home raided. Just to reiterate also for those just joining in, Jeffrey Clark was the person who Trump was trying to install as acting Attorney General. Jeffrey Clark was on board with, allowing the state of Georgia to reject its electors because of a claim of irregularities in that election that were not backed up by any shred of evidence. And yet he was going to say that there were irregularities, and that would clear the way for Georgia to rescind their slate of electors. So Jeffrey Clark is a dangerous guy. Good news that he had his home raided by the DOJ. Obviously, a step in the right direction. I have no insight into what DOJ is or isn't doing, but I would imagine that seeing a raid on Jeffrey Clark's home is a good thing. So we'll do about 45 minutes more of just a discussion on what we've seen in these previous hearings. Before I go on, I would just want to ask, if you're not yet subscribed to my channel, if you could please subscribe. That is the best way to support me. I know the other day, like a week and a half ago, when we had that really early hearing, I was so tired and I just kept telling people that the best way to subscribe is to subscribe. I don't drink coffee, and so 4:30 in the morning is, because I'm on Pacific time, I'm in Los Angeles, 4:30 in the morning is rough. So in any case, the best way to support me is to subscribe. So if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, I would really appreciate it. I'll continue doing these live streams for all of the hearings as they continue to come about. I believe this is the last one of this month, and that we'll have more live streams coming up more hearings coming up in July. We may have 2 more, but again, they haven't released their schedule, so I can't say anything for sure. But in any case, yes, if you're not yet subscribed, that is the best way to support my work and the best way to be notified when I do have these hearings. So hit the subscribe button. Doesn't cost you anything, completely free, and I would really appreciate it. So thank you in advance. Someone asked if I can get the volume louder, so I will just move this closer. Also, I do other on this channel. It's not just live streams. I do breaking news videos, probably about 1 a day. They average about 5 or 6 minutes. So if you have 5 minutes free in your day and want to hear usually what I try to find is the most important breaking news story of that day, you can watch that on this channel. And I do interviews usually once a week, and I've interviewed everybody from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, Katie Porter, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Jen Psaki. So I try to get these interviews, and actually your subscriber numbers and your views help me in terms of getting subsequent interviews. So thank you in advance, and thank you to people who already do subscribe and watch, because seeing those numbers makes it easier for my next guest to be like, okay, yeah, that's a good platform to go on. In their limited amount of time, they can either choose between going on a non-traditional media outlet like mine, or they can go on a mainstream media outlet and just do their regular CNN interviews. So for more people like me who only exclusively use the internet to get their news, that's a way to help this ecosystem more broadly. So anyway, that's the end of my self-promotion. I'm gonna go on and talk about what we've heard from these previous hearings. But I wanted to continue talking about last week's, just in terms of that violence that these elections workers had to contend with. And I think the most important point here, there was a point where Adam Schiff asked Shay Moss, who was that Fulton County election worker, of the other election workers shown in that State Farm Arena video and their supervisors, how many are still elections workers in Fulton County? And Shay Moss said, there is no permanent election worker or supervisor in that video who is still there. And I think that is the most dangerous part of all of this, because, it's not just about scaring these people into doing their bidding. And obviously their bidding was to try to, get them to overturn the election or to not certify any results that Biden won or whatever it was. It's not just about doing their bidding in that moment. It is also to create this chilling effect where no Democrats, because they know the violence that's going to come about, they see these far-right white supremacist nationalist groups who get their phone numbers and who camp out outside their houses. Nobody wants to subject themselves to that. And so none of this is an accident. This is the purposeful consequence of the very political violence that Trump and his allies have not only endorsed but incited also. This chilling effect here is the goal for those people, and it's actually twofold, because like I said, by virtue of putting all that pressure on these people, they're trying to get them to do whatever it is that they want them to do. If they don't want them to count certain ballots, they're trying to get them not to count certain ballots. They're trying to pressure them into not certifying election results for Joe Biden. Obviously, we saw last week as well that Brad Raffensperger's wife was receiving sexualized texts That was in an effort to pressure her husband into finding 11,780 non-existent votes. Trump supporters broke into the home of Brad Raffensperger's daughter-in-law, who's a widow and has kids, so she had no one there to protect her, and she had little kids in her house, and had dealt with the death of her husband, and Trump supporters broke into her home. So if you don't think that there is a chilling effect that these people are having, again, not only by trying to get them to find those 11,780 votes, but also by showing that, like, who wants to take these jobs? Who would subject themselves to this stuff? We know this stuff is happening. There's a reason that Al Schmidt, the commissioner in Philadelphia, quit also. There's a reason that none of these Fulton County elections workers who are in those videos, none, zero, are working there, are still there. That is the goal. That's like the long-term insidious goal. And at the same time, you have the Steve Bannons of the party who have made it their life's work to try to fill these slots, to fill this vacuum that he himself and his allies have created with people who aren't good actors, good faith actors, people who are just partisan actors who are looking to make sure that Trump wins the next election by any means necessary. And that's the asymmetry that I'm talking about, where, ideally for Democrats, you have these people who are just trying to do their work and do the right thing and follow the law. And then ideally for Republicans is people who don't give a shit about the law and who just want to undermine the entire game, the entire system, just to install their person as the winner. They don't care about winning. It's just about being there at the end, about getting the end result that they want. They don't care about, like, making sure that the most people vote for them. That's like a far distant thought in their minds, is like in terms of that being something that they're striving for, to like win the most votes. Thank you, by the way. I see people donating in the chat. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. A couple of other points from this last one. Trump had claimed that 5,000 dead people voted in Georgia. It turns out after the audits, and I think they did 3 audits and recounts in the state of Georgia, Trump said there were 5,000. The actual number, 4. There were 4 votes from people who'd been deceased. 4. If you think that 4 is in any way comparable to 5,000, or that 4 is going to swing an election, or that 4 is even something worth talking about, I mean, granted, if that's fraudulent and you can find those people, great. That is not widespread fraud. That is not any reason to doubt the veracity of the results in Georgia. 4 dead people, not 5,000. Another striking part from the last testimony is Mark Meadows wanted to send the same Georgia election officials, the investigators rather, who were investigating all of this stuff, quote, a shitload of POTUS stuff, including coins, actual photographed MAGA hats. So they were trying to trade hats for an election. Another important point, and I'll finish with this from the last hearing, is that Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, they revealed that a staffer for Ron Johnson had come out and said that that Ron Johnson wants to hand fake slates of electors from Michigan and Wisconsin to Mike Pence. And this was staff to staff. And obviously, Mike Pence's staffer said, don't. And that was the end of it. But the fact is that, and of course, when Ron Johnson was questioned on this, he said, I had no idea this was happening. This was just staff to staff. This was some house intern that handed somebody a packet, and we didn't know anything about it. Meaning that all it takes for Ron Johnson, a powerful U.S. senator, his chief of staff, to text an official in the vice president's office is for some unnamed random house intern to hand you a packet. You don't even have any scruples about it. You just blindly take that packet if you're in Ron Johnson's office and you hand it off to the vice president. You don't even look at what it is. As if we're supposed to believe that. As if we're supposed to believe, A, that Ron Johnson had no idea what that packet was. He just had his staff determining, without ever consulting him, that he would just randomly hand this piece of paper that he had no idea what was on it to the vice president. during a disputed, quote unquote disputed election certification process, as if we're really supposed to believe that Ron Johnson had no idea what was on those papers, and that some person working in his office, I think he said it was his first day in his office as chief of staff, is just deciding what this U.S. senator is handing the vice president with no consultation with the actual senator himself. Give me a break. And second of all, that his office had no idea what was on those papers. It was just some random house intern. So you're telling me that all it takes is a random house intern to hand you a packet of paper and say, hey, your boss, Ron Johnson, should hand that to the Vice President of the United States. And they'll just say, okay, yeah, we'll make it happen right now. We'll text the Vice President's office. Thank you, house intern. Like, these excuses make no sense whatsoever. So obviously Ron Johnson recognizes he was caught. He was questioned by Manu Raju from CNN. He was questioned by a number of other people. He had one point where he was running away from the cameras, had his phone up to his ear, and they were saying, like, they were questioning him about this fake elector scheme and trying to hand in this packet of documents from Michigan and Wisconsin. And he goes, I'm on the phone. And the reporter goes, no, you're not. I can see the screen. I can see the screen. You're literally not talking on the phone right now, because the screen was like a regular home screen. So, these people might be dangerous, but nobody ever accused them of being too smart. We also heard from Arizona Speaker Bowers and House Speaker Bowers, and he gave like this can go both ways, and I'll explain why in a moment. He gave this really emotional speech about how he wouldn't bend to these demands by White House officials, by Trump officials. Rudy Giuliani said that, we've got lots of theories, but we just don't have the evidence. And so Bowers was like, no, I'm not calling a special session to investigate like irregularities in this state that you have no evidence of. He said, quote, you're asking me to do something that's never been done in the history of the United States, and I'm going to put my state through that without sufficient proof, and that's going to be good enough for me? No, sir. So he gave this whole emotional speech, which was great, and it was the right thing to do, and I'm sure that someone like him was instrumental in ensuring that this election theft scheme didn't happen in a state like Arizona. And yet at the same time, afterwards, Bauer came out and announced that if Trump was running again, he would vote for him if he was the Republican nominee. Let me see if I could find that article so I can get the exact quote. So the AP did an interview with him. He said Trump's evidence-free attacks on the legitimacy of the election have proven, quote, very destructive to Americans' trust in democracy, but also includes this, quote, if he is the nominee, if he was up against Biden, I'd vote for him again, simply because what he did the first time before COVID was so good for the country. In my view, it was great. I mean, this is a rot in the Republican Party. It's not just a few people, and it's not just the extremists. This is somebody who came and testified and nearly was brought to tears by the illegal, immoral, unconstitutional threats against his state and efforts to overturn the results in his state, all without a shred of evidence of voter fraud. I mean, this guy was almost brought to tears. And yet, the day after, he says, yeah, no, I'd vote for him again, though. I don't know if it's just extreme partisanship or just like a systemic rot. If you basically concede that this guy, that Donald Trump has all of these authoritarian, dictatorial tendencies, that he will do whatever he can to undermine the election results and throw away democratic rule in this country, and yet you would still vote for him because you don't like that like gas prices are high or that Fox News is reporting that there's migrant caravans, then you are part of that problem. For these people that like, the only way that this goes away, the only way that Trumpism goes away, and this idea that democracy doesn't matter, just being in power matters. The only way that this goes away if Republicans suffer a repudiation at the ballot box. That's it. That's the only way. You're not going to vote in like the moderate Republicans, because the moderate Republicans are this guy Bowers, who was almost brought to tears by the audacity of the Trump team to commit what they committed, and yet still that guy would pull the lever for Donald Trump. So even the moderates are like just as much part of the problem as the lunatics. Their votes count the same. When you cast your ballot for Donald Trump, it doesn't matter how intensely that ballot was cast or how blindly you'd backed him. It doesn't matter if you're a Marjorie Taylor Greene vote for Trump or if you're a Bowers vote for Trump. If you're voting for Trump, that vote counts the same. And so the only way to stop this is to just like get through to people, the importance of turning out, the importance of finding people in your circles and encouraging and persuading them to register to vote, even if they don't think that they're a political person, even if they think they're moderate. Because the fact is, there's nothing moderate about this Republican Party if the vast majority of it is predicated on people like Donald Trump, who don't think that elections should count if he doesn't win, who don't think that Democrats inherently have the right to win elections. The danger in that can't be overstated. And so we're not going to have people like Bowers save us. We're not going to have these moderates save us. I mean, even we look at the Liz Cheneys and the Adam Kinzingers who didn't vote for H.R. 1, who didn't vote for the voting rights bill, when the whole issue here is the attacks on democracy. We can't rely on moderate Republicans to save us. And so I think like that's it. The only way to win, the only way to like put this to rest, to finally be done with this, is to deliver repudiations to these people. Otherwise, they're going to view it as a validation. That's it. It's a binary choice here. Either Republicans do well and see that as a validation of their current efforts to steal the election results, or they don't do well and they say, okay, now we have to retool because we lost power. Because that's the ultimate goal, is just power. And so if their efforts to steal the election are causing them to lose the election and lose power, they're going to retool. They're going to abandon that process because it's not working. But if they see that they can come out and say, the vast majority of them come out and say, the last election was stolen, there was a big lie, Trump should be president, the election, there was irregularities in Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. If they're going to do that and still win, then they're going to do more of that. Like, it's just basic, like, Pavlovian response, right? Like, they're being trained to continue doing what they're doing if it's causing them to win. So, I don't want to sound preachy, but like, I know roughly 25% of the people watching this right now in the United States are in swing states, are from a state that's either Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Georgia, Florida to a degree, North Carolina, New Hampshire. For those people, and I'm sure I'm forgetting one, even Iowa again to a degree. If you live in that state, if you have family or friends in that state, if you have a child who's like 18 or 19 and isn't yet registered to vote in that state, they are impacted by this. If they care about nothing having to do with regular politics, but climate change, for example, that is impacted solely by politics. If they care about women's, a woman's right to have autonomy over her own body, these rights that are getting stripped away in half the states across this country after Roe is gutted in the next day or week or so, then they are impacted by politics. So like, we can't go by this conventional wisdom that politics doesn't affect everybody, or it's just like people who focus on that stuff are the only people who are affected by that stuff, or it's just like, it's just about gas prices or immigration, and if you don't care about those regular issues like gas prices or migrant caravans or whatever it is that we constantly talk about in these elections, that it'll have no impact on you and just ignore it. That's not what's happening right now. Gun violence is happening in schools across the country. Nobody can tell whether their school is going to be impacted, whether their grocery store or concert or hotel or church or synagogue or mosque or whatever it is. Everywhere in this country, we've seen examples of gun violence. That is a political issue. I know we like to pretend that it's not a political issue. Republicans like to pretend that it's not a political issue so that they could buy themselves time to allow the temperature to come down so that they don't have to do anything to actually pass any meaningful gun safety legislation. But that is an inherently and overtly political issue. And so if that's something that you care about, if you're a young parent, if you have grandkids, if you want to be able to go to church safely, if you want to be able to go to temple safely, the grocery store safely, a concert safely, then you care about doing whatever you can to make sure that we have legislators in office who are going to pass legislation that will protect us from gun violence. Even if you're not political, that's an issue that impacts you. If you get pregnant when you're young and you want to have the right to have an abortion, to have the choice to have an abortion in this country, you might not be political. That is a political issue that will impact you. The most fervent supporters of abortion rights in this country are young men. And that's not what we would think it would be. We would think it would be like solely an issue that women would care about, and it is an issue that women care about. But the strongest supporters of abortion rights are young men. All of those people should know. I'll tell you what. When I was in college, if abortion was illegal, that would have made me. That would have. Let's see how to put this diplomatically. I feel like you know what I'm trying to say. Like I shouldn't have started saying this. That wouldn't have been great. Is the most diplomatic way that I can put that. So in any case, all of these issues that you don't think, all of these people who you don't think are political because they don't, focus on the same political stuff. So many of these issues are political right now, and the only way to solve them is to make sure that people get involved in politics who weren't otherwise involved, who don't consider themselves political, who consider themselves neutral, who are too young to have paid attention before, but now are of the age where they can register to vote. So, I think that the onus is on all of us. And look, like people like me can, and I've said this before as well, people like me can talk to you all day long, can do these videos all day long, can reach as many people as I humanly can. I still won't have close to as big an impact as you individually, personally can have reaching out to your own circle of people. I said this in one of my other streams. I think it was just this past Tuesday. My mom had never voted before. And if you think just because of what I do that I could have convinced her to vote, like you do not know the stubbornness of a Jewish mother from Brooklyn. So I stopped even trying because, there's no way to get through to her. I know there's a ton of people out there who have parents and relatives who are just like me, who are like, fuck that, I don't care about politics, nothing's going to change, the whole system's corrupt. But she voted for the first time, just I think in large part due to the fact that I did what I did and would try to convince her as much as I could, and she surprised me and sent a picture from like the voting booth, and that was the first time that I'd seen. That was the first time that she voted, and like that was huge. And I'd gotten like a few messages from people who say like, I'd never voted before I started watching your channel, and I voted for the first time. And like those few people were more meaningful than seeing like 50 million people watch videos that month, because you don't know if any of what you're doing is actually any of what I'm doing is actually making a tangible impact. And that's like my biggest fear, is just to be like speaking to the, yelling out into an echo chamber and just kind of words get lost in the ether. But like there are people who can be impacted, and that is such a good feeling. And if you have people in any of these swing states, if you have people in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, then do what you can to make sure that these people are registered and that they have a plan to vote, because that is the only way any of this gets fixed. To go back to my main point at the beginning of this, the only way anything gets fixed is if Republicans suffer a repudiation at the ballot box that is so big that it causes them to finally abandon this strategy of just subverting election results and undermining democracy, because everything else, that is the foundational issue. So if you care about women's reproductive rights, if you care about gun rights, if you care about climate change, if you care about healthcare, all of these rely on having a functioning democracy. So, I would just like plead to people, and I hope that I'm not just like, I hope I'm not coming off as too preachy, but plead to people the importance of using your own circle and your own relationships with people to actually make sure that they're registered to vote, because in a place like Wisconsin, I think if they had flipped just 2 people per precinct, that could have been the difference between a Trump win and a Biden win. just 2 people per precinct. Also, let me know in the chat too, if there are any people. I'm very curious to know, because this is what I'm most interested in. If there are any people who you've been able to reach out to personally and get to register to vote or something like that. I'm super curious to like see if people here have been able to have any impact on their circles, or if they have kids that they've been able to get to register to vote, or parents that they've been able to get to register to vote. I had somebody email me the other day and tell me that he was able to get his 82-year-old mother to register to vote and to vote for the first time. And so like that stuff is great. That's the whole ball game. That's why I do this. That's why I hope, that's what I hope comes across from all of this. That's what I hope that people watching can get people to do. That's the most important thing for me. So let me know in the comments. I'd really love to hear if people voted for the first time because of something that you did. Also, for people asking about the hearing will start in about 18 minutes. I think at 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific, barring any issues, and I haven't heard of any issues. This is awesome. I mean, if you look at the chat right now, there's a ton of people saying 18 years old, my kids are 18 years old, I got my father who is 76, a lifelong Republican to vote blue, got my husband to vote for the first time in the last election, my mom brought me to vote for my first time, got my daughter registered at 17, she turned 18 by the 2020 election, got my husband to vote for the first time, just registered my 18-year-old son, that's Teresa. Like, this is awesome. That's the whole thing. That's like, you put in, all of us put in so much time and energy and effort to try to make sure that people are paying attention and aware, and like, it's for that. Like, these people saying that they got their husband and their kids to register to vote, and their parents to register and to vote for the first time, people who themselves registered to vote for the first time, daughters, like, that's everything. That's the whole game here. So thank you guys for doing that, because that far exceeds anything that I can do on YouTube. So in any case, let's keep going. Yeah, this is great. If you want to be like, have your faith restored in humanity, just read the comments in the chat right now. All of these people who voted for the first time, who convinced family members to vote for the first time, who convinced lifelong Republicans to vote for the first time. Somebody just said, I got my mom not to vote for Trump. So, you have these Republicans who didn't go out and vote for Trump for the first time. I have family members who were Obama-Trump voters who then voted for Biden. I mean, that is like, that's the end goal of all of this. So it's great to be able to read that, and I hope people watching are reading these comments right now and just having a little bit of their faith in humanity restored at a time when we could use it. Okay, let me just make sure that there's no issues that I'm seeing right now in terms of the start time. Barring any issues, I think we'll be starting in about 15 minutes here. Just some other news real quick. We also have the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That is the bipartisan gun legislation that has been ushered through the Senate by Senator Chris Murphy. They overcame the filibuster by a vote of 65 to 34. That'll probably be the final result. So this thing should pass either today or tomorrow. There can be up to 30 hours of debate. So depending on how much of that debate time they actually use, they could do the vote today, or if they are using, if these Republicans are standing up and trying to extend this as long as possible, this could go into tomorrow, and we can see this vote happen tomorrow. But overcame the filibuster by a vote of 65 to 34, so we'll probably see that legislation pass. And that includes funding for states to implement red flag laws, It addresses the boyfriend loophole. It doesn't include some of what I think would be more some of the most useful elements, like barring 18-year-olds from being able to buy a semi-automatic weapon. But you know, I guess in this Senate, you take what you can get, and just point to that as evidence of why we need more Democratic senators, 2 more Democratic senators to be exact, who would be able to and willing to eliminate the filibuster, so that we can actually have a workable majority in the Senate and pass some of this legislation that's just kind of languishing right now because we have a 60-vote threshold that we're never gonna be able to overcome. Okay. Make sure that there's no updates from the January 6th committee. Nope, I think we are all good. Just in terms of what we're going to hear in the next 13 minutes or so, some of the witnesses we're going to see today are, like I said before, Richard Donoghue. Richard Donoghue, who was the former acting Deputy Attorney General. We're going to hear from Jeffrey Rosen, who was the former acting Attorney General. And we'll hear from Stephen Engel, who's the former Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel. So again, all of these people are going to be discussing ways in which Trump tried to use or leverage the Justice Department to effectuate his election theft scheme. We heard a preview of it from the end of the last hearing, so this will promise to be definitely an interesting one. Hang on one sec. Okay, so now we have our feed here is live. We're getting ready in about just over 10 minutes, and we'll get this going. Thank you, by the way, to people donating. I really appreciate it. I'll use this time too to ask, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, if you could please subscribe. That'll help me in terms of not only running these live streams for these hearings. I've done this is the 5th one I've done in a row so far. It also helps in terms of booking guests, and it's a much larger uphill battle for me as like an independent creator to be able to book politicians and senators and lawmakers and White House officials, because I don't have the history that like CNN or MSNBC has, and so I just kind of have to constantly prove myself and show them the numbers and say like, this is the amount of subscribers, this is the amount of views, and just kind of get these Democrats to like wean themselves off of just thinking that the only way to actually reach people is like CNN or MSNBC, because it's not. And people are just solely watching online. I don't even have a TV. Not in a cool way, just it doesn't make sense for me to have paid for a TV when I can watch anything I want to watch on like Hulu and Netflix and Apple TV. So but I'm not going to get cable so that I can watch CNN. So with that said, yeah, anybody who's not yet subscribed, if you can just hit the subscribe button, it's free, it doesn't cost you anything, and that will help me in terms of continuing to book guests, and just helping out like the progressive media ecosystem more broadly, because these subscriber numbers, these engagement numbers help in terms of when I post content versus when a Ben Shapiro or a Steven Crowder or not Dan Bongino anymore, but just any of these right-wingers post content. If they see higher engagement for progressive content, that progressive content reaches more people. And so if you have people that are just coming on to YouTube for the first time and don't know whether they're going to be filtered into watching, the Ben Shapiros of the world, if there are videos on the left, and it's not just me, I mean, it could be Crooked Media or Midas Touch or TYT or Pacman or Kalinsky or Breaking Points, whatever it is, if they're watching that content versus something on the right-wing ecosystem, these are people who might not be interested in politics and who might be shaped by the first thing that they see, and the goal is to make sure that they see something on the left and not on the right. Like these are people who are not inherently political, and like you want to, anything we can do to kind of bolster the progressive media ecosystem versus the conservative media ecosystem, I think will have a major impact. And again, it's not just me. This isn't like self-serving. Any channels that you can subscribe to and watch their content and like their content on the left, I think that will help us more broadly as like more and more people slowly log on to onto YouTube and stop watching TV. I think like we need to filter those people any way we can onto into the progressive media ecosystem. So I think that's important. And anyway, thank you. I appreciate it. One thing I want to point out. Let's see. Hang on one sec. Okay, we're less than 10 minutes away. Less than 10 minutes away from this starting. I'll answer some questions. I've been talking for so long. I'll answer some questions if you have them. So you can throw questions into the chat and I'll try to answer them. And thank you, by the way, for people donating. I see it and I appreciate it. I forgot, my friend Glenn Kirshner also. If you haven't yet subscribed to his channel, he's wonderful. I've had him on my channel a bunch. He is so knowledgeable about all this stuff. So Glenn Kirshner, Glenn. He's great to follow as well for all things legal. He's the guy to go to. I mean, that's like a huge interest of mine. I just want like factual information from. He's a 30-year prosecutor, so definitely check out Glenn Kirshner. Can't say enough nice things about him. Somebody asked when my birthday is. January 12th. That's my birthday. Right after Christmas. So all the gifts I get for Christmas, I'm left with nothing that I need. And then the other 11 months of the year, all the things I want, I have to wait. Somebody asked, how do we stand? Do we stand a chance if we don't expand the court? Seems like they're gonna do whatever they want. Yes, I agree with that. And this might seem, and I'm just gonna pause the questions for a sec so I can answer this question. This might seem really like nihilistic, but yes, if we don't expand the court, then we ultimately won't get what we want. Because this court won't allow anything that we want to stand. If we do a federal law codifying abortion rights, if we do a federal law codifying Roe, they can still strike that down. And then we have no federal protections for Roe. Even if we get a couple more senators who are willing to eliminate the filibuster so that we can pass the Women's Health Protection Act through both houses and then signed by the president, even if we pass that, the Supreme Court could say like, no, embryos have a right to personhood, and so this is inherently unconstitutional. They could do that. They could, at the same time, they could uphold a federal ban on abortions. So yes, until and unless we expand the Supreme Court, we ultimately won't get what we need. That's why I'm so hell-bent in the beginning on like pushing this idea that what's radical is not expanding the Supreme Court. What's radical is watching what the Supreme Court is doing right now. Okay, you can ask questions again, and I'll try to answer them. Has Lindsey Graham commented on these hearings? I haven't noticed anything. I haven't noticed anything either. I think he's probably being, his voice is being drowned out by the more extreme elements of his party. And so he'll do what he can to be just as extreme. How do we actually change people's viewpoint on all of the hypocrisy and diversion? I think we just call it out and we repeat it. And I think that's the important thing. Like the right thinks that they have a monopoly on repetition. And so we'll hear build the wall, we'll hear make America great again on a daily basis. And that works. And there's reason it's seared into our minds. But I think we should be doing that too. And we can do that too. That's why I've repeated so many times if you watch my videos. And I kind of apologize, but also I kind of don't apologize. You've heard me say that while they'll claim there's fraud, we had 65 court cases where they failed to find even a single instance of fraud. They had Republican secretaries of state who failed to say that there was any fraud. We had recounts and audits that confirmed the original counts. So I'll repeat this stuff over and over and over again to try to like hammer it into people's minds and do it in a way that's simple. And I think that's how we do it. When is my next interview with Beto? Hopefully soon. I think I've interviewed Beto like 3 or 4 times now, so hopefully soon. I know enough is happening in Texas that an interview with him is probably warranted. Besides being arrested, what could possibly or potentially or probably happen to Trump and other politicians involved? What I want to see from a Trump indictment is barring him from running for office again. That's what I want to see in all of this. People are saying Sean Penn is in the audience. Is that true? Is Sean Penn at the January 6th committee hearing? Is Ron Johnson going down? I'm sure he's caught in the crosshairs of this thing. Is he going down is such a hard question to answer. Is this Sean Penn? I don't know. I don't think that's Sean Penn. In any case, is he going down is such a hard question to answer because we've not seen anything to like prove that theory. Oh, I think that might be Sean Penn. We've not seen anything that would prove that theory that there is actually accountability. That's not to say that I can't hope beyond hope that it's happening right now, but it's hard to say with any like semblance of certainty. Okay, so we're about 2 minutes away here from this this committee hearing beginning. Again, this will focus on Trump's efforts to get the DOJ to follow along in his efforts to overturn the election results. So let's get some volume going here. Oh, now people are saying it's not Sean Penn. So there's only one explanation, one avenue for recourse here, and that's to go to Twitter. And Twitter is saying that Sean Penn is there, so it's confirmed. If Twitter says it, it must be true. So Sean Penn is there. Some quick news out of the EU. The European Union leaders have agreed to make Ukraine.
And we've seen the witnesses.
Ukraine and Moldova candidates for EU membership after giving bids a speedy review. So that's some good news out of Ukraine. And as soon as this hearing begins, we're expected to see it beginning in about a minute or so. As soon as this hearing begins, I'll get it full screen here. Okay, so we're now noon Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. So it should be starting any moment now. These committee hearings are usually pretty close to being on time. So for people just tuning in, thank you for tuning in. This is day 5 of the January 6th committee hearings. We're going to focus on Trump's efforts to use the DOJ to help him in his scheme to overturn the election results. C-SPAN also confirmed it is Sean Penn. So we have the top story of the morning. Is that Sean Penn is at the January 6th committee hearing. Okay, let me go split screen here. And let me know where you're watching from as well. I know we have people here from New Zealand right now. Okay, the January 6th committee members are walking in right now. So I'm going to stop talking in a moment. I'll use this chance one last time to ask if you're not yet subscribed to my channel, if you could please subscribe. It's the best way to support me. It's also the best way to find these live streams for subsequent hearings. So, wow, a lot of people watching from all over. Netherlands, Austria, UK, Hungary, California, Oregon, Montana, Toronto, Kauai, Texas, Malaysia, Denmark, man, France, more Denmark, Berlin, Minneapolis. Okay. A lot that we heard from these DOJ officials. I just want to read what I think are some of the more important points. We just have 10 minutes here, so I'll try to make sure that we can fit everything. Okay, just a few quotes that I think were especially important. First of all, Liz Cheney said that they'll identify some of the Republican congressmen who asked Trump for pardons at the end of this committee hearing. We already know that Scott Perry had requested a pardon. He, of course, came on the Twitter previously and denied it and called it a soulless lie. I'll tell you what, if Scott Perry didn't request a pardon, he should have, because this doesn't look great for him that he was coordinating meetings between the White House and DOJ, hopeful DOJ officials who were specifically selected because they were known to be willing to do Trump's bidding to overturn the election results. And of course, they had these people like Donahue, like Rosen, who weren't willing to do their bidding and who were, constantly coming back against Trump's claims of fraud and swatting them down one by one. And so that's why they needed to find people like Jeffrey Clark, who would be more than willing to do their bidding. Other DOJ officials had said if they do what they're trying to do and do install Jeffrey Clark as the Attorney General, they would all resign en masse. Obviously not a great look, even for someone like Trump who doesn't really care about optics. So we'll hear from other people we'll hear from these committee members in terms of what the January 6th committee knows in terms of other Republican officials who are looking for pardons from Trump. They did give a list of people that I think might be suggesting that these are the people. It of course included Jim Jordan, Andy Biggs, Mo Brooks, Paul Gosar. CNN has already reported that Mo Brooks, Andy Biggs, and Paul Gosar had requested pardons from Trump that hadn't been verified by the January 6th committee, but it could possibly be verified today. Something I find interesting too is that for years we heard all of this pearl clutching and saw fainting spells from all these Republicans who pretended that tarmac meeting between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch was the worst like DOJ offense in the history of this country, that the Attorney General met with then President Bill Clinton, and we don't know what they talked about. And yet at the same time, Trump was meeting with these DOJ officials on a conveyor belt, and it's just silence from the right. If you were wondering about the hypocrisy here, which I'm sure you were. I'm sure you looked at this and said, you know what, I'm not really seeing too much hypocrisy on the right. If only there were some instances of hypocrisy. Well, there you go. Let's pull this a little closer. Maybe make it a little bit easier to hear here. I'll also raise the gain a little bit on my mic. There we go. Okay, this should be better in terms of the volume of my mic. Sorry about that. I know it was a little bit low. Okay, some other good points that I think should be reiterated. Giuliani had testified in his deposition, quote, "Someone should be put in charge of the Justice Department who isn't frightened of what's going to be done to their reputation." And that's while advocating for Jeffrey Clark to be put in charge of the DOJ. If your qualification is that this person is immune to criticism and won't worry what is, quote, done to their reputation, like the ability for Rudy Giuliani to say the stupidest shit out loud. I mean, it's exactly what these people are thinking. It's exactly what they're doing. But only Giuliani is this guy that's willing to actually say these things out loud. Just like the abject shamelessness of coming forward and saying, we need someone who doesn't care what happens to his reputation, given the overt corruption that he's gonna move forward with while advocating for this scheme, while trying to like put in place this scheme. Kinzinger said Trump, quote, wanted top DOJ officials to declare that the election was corrupt, even as he knew that there was absolutely no evidence to support that statement. The president didn't care about actually investigating the facts. He wanted DOJ to put its stamp of approval on the lies. And I think that's one of the most important things that we've taken out of this hearing so far. It's that Trump would come forward with all of these claims of fraud, and the DOJ, of course, would investigate them and swat them down one by one systematically. And the point here wasn't the actual claims of fraud. I mean, there were some insane claims of fraud. ASOG was one. They released a report that said there was a 68% error rate in, I forgot what precinct it was. It was in one specific precinct or election area. He said, quote, ASOG released a report that said 68% error rate, and this is Deputy Attorney General Donahue. There was a hand recount. For the ballots that were counted by machine, there was one error. One ballot. That's a .0063 error rate compared to the 68% error rate that Trump tried to claim. One ballot versus 2/3 of all ballots. I mean, dear God. So anyway, the point wasn't to bring forward legitimate claims of fraud. It was just to have an avalanche of claims of fraud that they could then use to feed this narrative that there was fraud. And then they would use that narrative, use those lies, which they hoped would be validated by the DOJ, to then move forward and say, you know what, we're going to need a 10-day waiting period. We're going to need to send these electors back to the states. The more time that they could buy, the easier it would be for these people to validate their own made-up claims of election fraud. And so they were doing anything they could, but it wasn't about actually proving any of these claims. That's why when Trump brought any of these claims to these members of the DOJ and they were swatted down, it wasn't like, oh, okay, you're right, let's move forward then. It was, well, what about this? What about this? We had a truck driver who said this. We had some random person who signed an affidavit in Michigan. We have these claims from ASOG. We have 68%, whatever it was, it was just about the mere existence of a barrage of allegations that they would then point to like feed their narrative that there was fraud, and then move forward with that narrative that there was fraud to do whatever they can to get the state of Georgia, for example, to stop the certification of their election results, send it back to the states, allow the Republican-led legislatures in that states and other states to then appoint a Trump slate of electors and send that forward. I mean, it was all this systematic plan from the bottom up, but it involved the DOJ just blessing their scheme. And the DOJ wasn't willing to do that, but, I mean, this DOJ wasn't willing to do that. It just goes to show that, but for a few people in the DOJ who weren't willing to play ball with these Trump officials like Donald Trump, Giuliani, John Eastman, and even Republican lawmakers like Scott Perry and God knows who else, although I'm sure we'll find out. If not for just a few officials, this is what they would have done. This was the plan. Like Kinzinger said, POTUS didn't care about actually investigating the facts. He just wanted the DOJ to put its stamp of approval on the lies. I think that's the most important element of all of this, is that they knew everything was lies because they were told by these officials that they were lies. I mean, Donahue is here saying that we investigated these claims of fraud where there were 68%, there was a supposed 68% error rate, and there was a .0063 error rate. There was one ballot that was different from a machine recount. So again, these people like Trump and Giuliani knew the truth, but they opted to move forward with the lies anyway, because the lie was the point. It wasn't a fact-finding mission, it was a fake narrative mission. They just needed something to validate their claims here. Donahue even recorded a direct quote from Trump. He had, as part of his handwritten notes, and he said, quote, "Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and Republican congressmen." I mean, talk about the most damning quote that you could possibly have. Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and Republican congressmen. And you have people like Scott Perry, and I'm sure we're going to find out from people like, Paul Gosar, Andy Biggs, Mo Brooks, Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, possibly, that they were involved in these efforts as well. I mean, we already know that they were involved in the efforts to perpetuate this lie, but we'll find out more about them, and we'll also find out who sought pardons from Trump. Jamie Raskin himself called these pardons declarations of consciousness of guilt, because these people knew that what they were doing was wrong. If you had Scott Perry, who actually thought that he was like committing this virtuous action here by helping Trump, why would the first thing he did at the end of this be to request a pardon from Trump? You generally don't request pardons if you think that you are following the law. Declaration of consciousness of guilt. Kinzinger opened also with a quote that I think is worth repeating. He said, quote, "Imagine the country's top prosecutor with the power to open investigations, subpoena, charge crimes, and seek imprisonment. Imagine that official pursuing the agenda of the other party instead of that of the American people as a whole." And then he said to Democrats, imagine the other party doing that as well. So I think the point here is like the tables could turn. And if you're a Republican, do you want to see an attorney general who has the power to open investigations, who has the power to charge crimes, to subpoena people, and to seek imprisonment? And would you want to see that official doing the bidding of a political party rather than the law, the Constitution, the will of the American people? That's what you get. That's what this scheme validates. And of course, Trump administration officials and Trump himself don't care, because all they care is what's right in front of them. And so whatever they have to mow down on the way is just, a necessary sacrifice for them. But looks like the committee is coming back in. One more request now before we go live back on the committee. If you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please hit the subscribe button. Best way to support my work and to be notified for subsequent hearings here. Again, it's free to subscribe. I don't charge anything, so if you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, please do me that favor and just throw me a subscribe. Thank you, and I'll end the shameless self-promotion now. Wow. Okay, so some big news in that one, most specifically just on the point of pardons. We have news now that the following Republican lawmakers did request pardons from Trump or the White House legal counsel or some iteration of that, and that is Matt Gaetz, Mo Brooks, Louis Gohmert, Andy Biggs, Scott Perry, and Marjorie Taylor Greene. As Adam Kinzinger himself said, the only reason that you request a pardon is because you think you've committed a crime. I think that's especially telling. These people, I've spoken about this so many times here, the fact that these people knew that what they were doing was wrong and yet opted to perpetuate these lies anyway. They knew that they were lying about the election being rife with fraud, about there being any widespread fraud, about any elements of the big lie, and yet they chose to push these lies forward anyway, even though they had been told by members of the DOJ or knew because of the numbers that were right in front of them that there was no fraud, or even in the midst of this impending warning of violence, they pushed it forward anyway because their goal here wasn't actually to show any fraud, because they already knew the truth. They'd already been told the truth. It was actually just to do whatever would be possible to help Trump with this scheme to overthrow the election. That's why they came forward asking for pardons, because they knew what they were doing was illegal. They knew this was a crime. You don't ask for pardons if you think that what you're doing is completely virtuous. So again, Jamie Raskin calls it a declaration of consciousness of guilt, which absolutely, counts for something with regard to both this committee and the DOJ. Adam Kinzinger himself again said that the only reason that you seek a pardon is, quote, because you think you've committed a crime. So I think those are especially telling points of what we've seen today from these Republican members of Congress. That if they thought what they were doing was right and virtuous and just and correct, they wouldn't have sought a pardon immediately after doing it. I think what they did in the privacy of the White House or their conversations with Trump betrays a hell of a lot more than what they were saying publicly, which was, oh, we believe that there's election fraud and you should come to the Capitol on January 6th. It'll be wild. Whatever they were saying publicly doesn't hold a candle to what they were saying in private, which was requesting these pardons because they knew that they'd done something wrong. Just a couple of other things I want to focus on. Just a few things I want to point out. Otherwise, I think one of the most important points is how the DOJ kind of stood up in the face of Trump's efforts to install Jeffrey Clark, who was just like some environmental lawyer. stood up in unison to prevent Jeffrey Clark from taking power. I know Donahue told Trump, this is the acting attorney general, the acting deputy AG, Donahue, told Trump that if appointed acting attorney general, Jeff Clark would, quote, be leading a graveyard because there would be so many DOJ resignations. Also, they coordinated a call with all of the assistant attorney generals across the country and said, if this happens, if Clark takes over the DOJ, will everybody here resign? And they all agreed. Everybody on that call agreed that the entire leadership of the DOJ, every AAG, would resign. And also, one especially powerful point that I think is worth noting here is that Trump was under the impression that if he could finally get Jeff Clark to be the acting attorney general and release this letter about there being non-existent, and he claimed that it was fraud, but non-existent fraud out of Georgia, and so that they have grounds to send the slate of electors back to the state, and then the Georgia Republican-led legislature could then send a Trump slate of elector. That was their whole plan. That if they could do that, it wouldn't turn out like Trump wanted, because he anticipated sending this letter, and then all of the news coverage would be about the letter, and we finally have proof with DOJ letterhead that there was fraud in the 2020 election. But in reality, they explained to him, if you go through 2 attorneys general in search of one who would finally be willing to release this letter, that would be the story. Nobody would care about this letter because it would be blatantly obvious that the only reason that Jeffrey Clark is there would be to release that letter, and that you just went through as many attorneys general as is humanly possible until you found one who is willing to do your bidding. And that would be the story. And that was, luckily one of the reasons I presume that Trump ultimately didn't move forward with this. That and the fact that there would be so many resignations. Again, all of that would have taken the oxygen out of the room. And Trump was hoping that the whole world would be focused on this letter. But if the entire DOJ leadership left the DOJ because this happened, then that's what people would be talking about. And you've got to be kidding yourself if you think that we're really going to ignore the fact that all of DOJ walked out, resigned in protest, all to talk about some letter that was obviously written just because you'd finally found some shill, some lackey who was willing to sign his name on some bullshit letter that you'd concocted. So, but it just goes to show the thinking. Trump would have done this in a heartbeat, regardless of how bad it looks, because it wasn't about optics. It was about doing anything humanly possible, mowing down whatever's in his way to get, to prove these baseless allegations of fraud. Other telling parts of this committee too, that Trump actually offered Jeffrey Clark the job of Attorney General, and that Jeffrey Clark was going to accept it, and that in their memos they already started writing acting AG Jeffrey Clark. So this thing was a done deal. Had it not been for people like Donahue and Rosen speaking with these AAGs across the country, speaking with this DOJ leadership, this would have happened. It was so close to actually moving forward. And then had Jeffrey Clark taken over, and again, this guy's like some environmental lawyer, had Jeffrey Clark taken over the entire DOJ with 115,000 employees, the first thing he would have done is release this letter, moved to acquiesce to all of Trump's demands about seizing voting machines and actually claiming that there was fraud, that it was backed up by the DOJ, even though there was zero evidence of there being any semblance of widespread fraud backed up by the DOJ, because they'd already done these investigations and proven that these allegations were completely false. He was going to say it anyway. Didn't matter a lick. What that would have done to not only the DOJ itself, but the entire country. Where do you even begin? You're basically ushering in the end of the DOJ's ability to act as any arbiter of truth or justice. That's it. If you have a DOJ investigation that's carried out that shows that there was no fraud, and then on DOJ letterhead you say that there was fraud anyway, and back it up with the word of the DOJ, that department ceases to exist as any valid voice in any of this. So thank God for these people who refuse to let this happen. And this stuff all happened behind the scenes. There's this DOJ investigation happening right now. We wouldn't have known any of this if it wasn't for the January 6th committee investigation and these hearings. Another especially telling point, Donahue testified that Trump told him, quote, "People tell me I should just remove you and make a change in leadership, put Jeff Clark in, and maybe something will get done," end quote, on overturning the election. So that's all he was looking to do. Just do whatever needs to get done. He had a conclusion in search of evidence. That's all this was about. He'd already made up his mind in terms of what he wanted to get done. This wasn't about finding facts because they had done their fact-finding missions. The DOJ had already done these investigations of the fraud allegations that Trump brought forward. We heard them. We heard Donahue testify about a number of these fraud allegations that were investigated by the DOJ. In one instance, Trump said that there was a 68% rejection rate in one of the voting machines. It turned out that there was one ballot that was that had changed from the original count to a recount. One single ballot on a voting machine that they claimed had 68% rejection. So we heard these allegations get swatted down by the DOJ, but it wasn't about that. It was about the conclusion that Trump was seeking and doing whatever was humanly possible to find any evidence that would prove that conclusion. And even if there wasn't evidence, just to get those letters anyway. To get Jeff Clark to sign his name on some DOJ letterhead and release that statement anyway, saying that there was fraud in Georgia, even though there wasn't. That was the goal. Didn't matter. Facts weren't in the same universe, in the same solar system as any of this. It was just saying what needed to be said to validate the lie. And I believe Trump had a quote exactly about that. Let me see if I could find that quote. Here it is. Trump said, this is a direct quote that Donahue recorded from Trump. "Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and Republican congressmen." Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and Republican. All he was looking for was the DOJ to validate his lie. He knew he could do the rest because nothing here was based on facts at any step in the process. It was all to feed the narrative. Because once there was enough doubt, once everybody's trust in the system was shaken enough that no one believes anything, when you destabilize the system enough, then it gave an opening for them to do whatever was necessary to actually move forward with, naming alternate slates of electors, getting Pence to refuse to certify the election results, whatever it was. It relied upon people being so unsure about the election results and about convincing these people that there was fraud that was ultimately non-existent, but convincing them that it was, because that pressure, they were relying on that pressure to be able to do what needed to be done to then move forward to overturn the election results. At the beginning, when it was 30% of Trump supporters who believed that there was fraud, that's not enough to actually move anything. But by virtue of repeating these lies over and over and over and over again, Fox, I think, repeated these claims of fraud 800 times. These Republican congressmen were going on a relentless barrage, this media tour, this endless media tour, perpetuating the big lie to the point where all of them requested pardons because they knew that they were complicit in these efforts to overturn the 2020 election. This was all a coordinated campaign from top to bottom. And it continues to be a coordinated campaign, by the way. But they knew if they could convince enough people, if they could do whatever they could to obfuscate the facts enough and make people believe that the election, that there was some semblance of widespread fraud, that there was irregularities, and they pointed to things that were happening in trucks in Pennsylvania, ballot machines in Georgia, they pointed to Michigan and Wisconsin, they pointed to Florida and Nevada and whatever state they could find it. My brother's sister's barbershop's best friend's college roommate said that he saw shredded ballots in a truck make its way right up to the top of the DOJ. Donald Trump himself was calling the acting deputy attorney general about these ridiculous. Italy, they thought that the Italian government was helping them steal the election. I mean, dear God, there was no conspiracy theory too ridiculous for these people to believe. That's how desperate they were, how hellbent they were on getting these people on finding anything that they could, any shit they could throw against the wall to see what sticks, in their effort to just change the narrative, to feed the narrative, and claim that there was fraud in this election so that they can then use that pressure and use those claims of fraud to justify what they did next, which was all, the Eastman memo, getting Pence to refuse to certify, getting these state legislators to send alternate slates of electors, getting Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general to help Trump seize voting machines and to send results back to Georgia so they can send in Trump slate vote. Everything was coordinated from the top to the bottom, but it was all predicated on this idea that there was fraud in the election, which all of these people knew was completely false. At every single one of these hearings, we heard from Trump administration officials and Trump campaign officials that at no point, and even DOJ officials, that at no point were any of these claims of fraud proven. And that the people that were advising Trump and speaking with Trump on a daily basis, they knew and they told Trump that none of these claims were valid. Meaning that he went forward with corrupt intent. He knew what he was doing and yet chose to lie anyway. Chose to push these schemes anyway. Chose to incite violence from his supporters anyway. All of this was done with criminal intent. If you're looking for them to prove it, they've proven it 10 times over. If the DOJ needs any rationale of criminal intent, they show it every single time there's one of these hearings. The extent to which Trump knew the truth and yet opted to lie, even though he knew that it was completely baseless. I think that's the most important point of all of this. No indictment's going to get passed down by the DOJ unless they could prove that he had corrupt intent. They've proven that he had corrupt intent 100 times over. He knew the truth. He was told by all of these people. Today we found out he was told by every single member that we'd heard testimony from in the DOJ. And that's in addition to the Bill Barrs and the Jason Millers and the Alex Cannons and even Ivanka Trump. Is there anybody in this administration who didn't tell him the truth other than Giuliani and Jeff Clark? That's it. The only two people that, and Sidney Powell. The only three people that Trump was actually pointing to as to validate his bullshit claims of fraud. So I think that's where we'll leave it today. Just two requests here. The first is, if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. I'll do a little intro to the next hearing and obviously live stream the entire hearing and do a wrap up like I'm doing right now. I also do daily videos, but they're only about 1 or 2 videos a day, about 5 minutes. Very light lift with this channel, and it's completely free to subscribe. So if you enjoy this breakdown and want to hear more hearings or just want to see the daily videos that I do, please subscribe to this channel. I would really appreciate it. And second, and I hadn't asked this before, but I figure it's worth an ask. I have a podcast that I do every week, and it's called No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. So if you listen to podcasts, that is a great way to support me as well. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts. Just type in No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I usually do, it's a pretty quick episode, 35, 40 minutes, and I usually have 2 interviews. This week, coming up, right now, I've spoken with Fred Gutenberg and Dan Pfeiffer, Obama's communications director. I believe I'll be speaking within the next 2 weeks with Senator Klobuchar, Senator Chris Murphy about the gun bill, and John Lovett from Pod Save America, and he's also one of Obama's speechwriters. So we have a lot of really good episodes coming up. So if you listen to podcasts, please subscribe to my podcast as well. Anyway, I'll stop with the self-promotion now. But thank you for watching. I appreciate it. As soon as I have the date and time for the next January 6th committee hearing, I'll post it. But just throw me a subscribe so you can be notified as soon as that post comes through. So thank you very much. I know you have a ton of places that you could watch this. So I really appreciate you watching on this channel and supporting independent progressive media. Supporting independent progressive media is the best way to counter so much of what we're seeing from the right wing on places like Facebook and YouTube, just in terms of like how those channels from Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder and Dan Bongino have just kind of taken over the social media sites. So any way that you could continue to lend engagement to or subscribe or watch any content from any progressive media channel, whether it's mine, Young Turks, Midas Touch, Crooked Media, is all appreciated. David Pakman, so totally appreciate it. So anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and talk to you next time.